All good, and welcome to day 2 of the National Ag Week here at PIFA, Primary Industries Education Foundation. And today we have the wonderful Jessica talking about honeybees. Really exciting stuff. Honeybees are a wonderful thing and so important to pollination. And so we're very fortunate to have Jessica to talk to us about honeybees. So I'll hand it over to you, Jessica. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just get my presentation up for everyone. Okay. So, hi everyone, I'm Jess. So I am a beekeeper. I'm also an industry liaison officer at Hive and Wellness Australia. And we work with over 800 beekeepers or bee farmers all over Australia. And they provide us with honey for the Capilano honey brand that you would see in the supermarket. So here are some of the families that supply us with honey. So we've got beekeepers in New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, South Australia, and of course, Western Australia. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is how this beautiful, yummy honey gets into this container and onto your toast or porridge or whatever else you love to have honey on. So you might already be familiar with these little girls, but this is a honeybee and this is a worker honeybee. So her responsibility is going and collecting nectar from flowers to bring back to her hive to make honey with. So this is a worker bee's body. So she has some really big eyes on the side of her head, which are called compound eyes. She's got actually 5 eyes in total. So she's got the 2 on the side. She has 3 on the front of her head, and she actually has 2 stomachs. So talking about collecting the nectar to bring back to the hive, the honeybee has a special honey stomach. So you can't see it here, but inside she's got 1 honey stomach and a stomach for her food. So also the other thing that bees collect is pollen, and we'll talk a little about this later, but pollen baskets that you can see here is how she takes pollen back to the hive. And then everyone would be familiar with a bee sting. So bees are actually a little bit dangerous and we have to be careful with them. So they can sting you. But yeah, as long as you don't bother them too much, they won't bother you. So this is how honeybees are born. So they start off as a little egg, so between 1 to 3 days. Then they hatch into a little grub, and the worker bees will feed them with mostly pollen, which we talked about before. And then eventually they grow into a grub that's big enough that they then cap off with a bit of wax on top. And then the bee inside it's kind of like a cocoon. They'll kind of pupate and develop into a honeybee from there. So that's between the 8 to 20 days. And then after 21 days, the little baby bee emerges from her cell, and the first job that she has to do is to clean out her cell and make sure it's nice and spotless so her mummy can lay another egg into that cell. And so queen bees, which is her mum, queen bees and drones are the male bees, will hatch around 3 days later. So they take a little bit longer to develop. So talking about the mummy bee, so this is the queen bee. So she's got a really long abdomen and she's filled with eggs. So her job in the whole hive is to just lay eggs, and that's all she does. So you can see here the little white dots here. So those, I think they actually might be slightly hatched grubs, but they might be eggs, I'm not too sure, but they're very tiny. So that's sort of how they start off. And then eventually, as we talked about earlier, these are the grubs. So they will get to a point where they're big enough to then be capped off. So you can see here, this is where they've been capped off, and they're now in their little cocoon and they're developing into bees. So with the queen bee, she develops a little bit differently. She actually has her own special cell. It's called a queen cell. And the worker bees build that, and that's sort of how the queen bees are made. So this is a drone bee. So you can tell him apart from his sisters because he has really, really big eyes, and he's quite a lot bigger and a lot more sort of square than a worker bee. So all the worker bees are female, and drones make up probably only about 2,000 well, probably even less than that, but around 2,000 drones to a hive of 30,000 bees. So that's a lot of bees. So he has really big eyes because he has to fly through the air and find queen bees. So that's why his eyes are really, really big, and he sort of looks a little bit like a blowfly. The other thing about drones is they don't have a stinger, so they can't hurt you. So this is a commercial beehive. So we talked about where the queen bee lays her eggs. So this is where she actually lives, and that's where all the eggs are laid and where all the baby bees are born. So this device here is called a queen excluder, and that actually keeps the queen bee in the chamber down here. So she can't get up into these top boxes because this is where all of the honey is produced. So this is where the worker bees, all of the frames in here are all built out with honey. So the queen can't get up there and put any baby bees in there because that would not be very easy for then the beekeeper to extract honey off if there's baby bees in there, and they don't want to hurt baby bees either. So there's the lid, there's a hive mat, so it keeps it nice and insulated because the bees like to have the hive at a nice certain temperature. So they're very particular. So as we talked about before, there's around 30,000 plus bees in a single beehive. And what you can see here is the beekeeper's just doing an inspection of the hive, and they're his children. So that's beekeeper Ross, and he is based in South Australia. So just a reminder, bees are, of course, they do have the stingers. They can hurt you. So we just ask to always don't approach a beehive without an experienced beekeeper for your own safety. So just to talk you through the process. So this is a photo from one of our wonderful beekeepers, Beekeeper Jack. So he's based in Murray Bridge, South Australia. So this is how he moves his hives around. So as you can see here, he has hives which are on pallets, and he uses this device, which is called a multi-one, which is a little bit like a forklift. He'll drive that down and he'll pick up the hives. So he'll undo the straps, obviously, that are here, and he'll pick the hives up, and then he'll drive them across and he'll put them in his apiary. So he's got his beehives on some mallee trees there, which is quite a popular honey down in South Australia to produce. So this is beekeeper Alan, and he's doing the same thing. He's just getting his hives all ready to unload. And that's around 120 beehives on that truck. So that's pretty incredible. The other reason why, so beekeepers will move their hives to chase honey flows and to make honey, but they will also move hives to get them away from natural disaster. And unfortunately, these are some photos of beekeepers who couldn't get to their hives quick enough. So there were some pretty scary bushfires last year, and we've had some pretty bad flooding this year. So this is why beekeepers move their hives around, because the environment's very temperamental, and we just don't know, when the next flood or when there's going to be another bushfire. So because the beekeepers work in bushland, they have to move their hives quite regularly to ensure the safety of their beehives. And yes, sadly, these ones didn't quite make it, but that's very rare. Our beekeepers are usually very good at getting their hives out of sticky situations, so to speak. So as discussed earlier, so honeybees collect 4 things. So they collect nectar, which has their carbohydrates, minerals, and vitamins. They collect pollen, which is their protein and minerals and vitamins. And they collect water, which they use to hydrate themselves and to cool the hive. And they also sometimes collect sap and resins from trees, which they use to keep the hive free from bacteria and germs and bugs. So they like to keep their hives very, very tidy. So you can see this little girl in here, she's enjoying some a eucalypt flower, which is very common, and we have around 70 to 80% of our honey comes from beautiful eucalypt trees in the bushland. So this is the pollen that I was talking about. So this little girl here, she's rolling up all of that beautiful golden pollen, and she's putting it onto her back legs. So the reason it stays there is because she's got little pollen baskets. So they're like little hairs that make up a little bit of a mesh on the back of her legs, which enables her to roll the pollen onto her legs like so. So again, this is their protein. So it's their stake. It's what they need to get their baby bees really healthy and strong. Without pollen, the hive actually gets quite sick. So before beekeepers approach their hives, they obviously have to think about safety first. And one of those things is making sure that they can pacify the bees. So these two beekeepers here are lighting their bee smokers, which they use to very gently pacify the bees by a little bit of a puff of smoke at the entrance before they go to open the hive. And what that does is it actually distracts the bees. It makes them eat a little bit of honey and relax. So it allows the beekeeper to then pop the lid, have a bit of a look through, and do a health check and also do a honey check. And also just a reminder to be very careful. Fire safety is also very important. So because the beekeepers work in the bush, they always have to make sure that there's no fire dangers, and they have to make sure they extinguish their smokers properly too. So what you can see happening here, so after the beekeepers smoked the entrance of the hive to let the bees know that he's there and he's not there to do any harm, he's just there to check them. He's actually having a look now through the brood box, which is where, as I explained earlier, the queen bee lives with all the baby bees and some of the nurse bees that are looking after them. So you can see here, that's the queen excluder. So he's lifted that off the top there, and he's just going to go through and he's just going to check the health of the hive. So checking the health of the hive is really, really important because he has to make sure that the bees are all healthy and well. So then what the beekeeper's doing here, and this is beekeeper Tim and his son Daniel, and just a reminder that yes, these beekeepers are professionals, so they don't have any equipment on right now, but it is very important to wear personal protective equipment like a veil and gloves and a jacket if you're not as confident with bees as these guys are. But they've been working with bees all their life. And are quite comfortable to do so. So what they're doing here is they're having a look to see whether or not that particular hive is ready to extract some honey from. So what they're looking for, so this is actually a photo of a frame of honey that hasn't been capped off yet. So what the bees do is they fill up all of the honeycomb, which is wax, with the nectar that they collect from the flowers. And then what they do is in the evenings when all the bees are home and it's the most wonderful smell, they start fanning the nectar in the frames to remove the moisture to make it nice and sticky. And then when they know that all of the moisture that they need to remove from it's gone, they cap it off with wax so it's completely sealed. And as I said, when you're walking through an apiary in the evening and all of the bees are home and you can hear them fanning and there's a beautiful humming noise and you can just smell the honey, it is just the most wonderful thing. So if you're wondering where beeswax comes from, it actually comes from the honeybee's abdomen. So one of the most important things is, so honey is actually bee food. So the bees they forage the nectar and they bring it back and they store the honey because that's what they use because they're actually animals that usually hibernate. So they store honey and then they have to eat honey to keep themselves to survive. But honey is really important in actually ensuring that the bees can make wax. So when they eat the honey, they can then produce really beautiful, nice white wax. And that's where it comes from. And it's quite amazing. It looks a little bit weird, I know, but I think it's pretty cool. So as you can see here, it's a little bit hard to see. I tried to find a better photo for you, but it's the best I could do. But you can see here how it's white and all waxy. That's where you can see that the bees have capped off all the honey, and this beekeeper knows, great, this is ready to extract. I can take this honey. And he also always makes sure that the bees have enough food left so he doesn't, so that their health is obviously always the most important. But he'll make a decision to say, I know that I can extract this honey off this hive and it's all going to be okay and my bees are going to be healthy and safe. So you can see here, that's just another shot of a frame that's all capped off. You can see the beautiful sunshine shining through the frame and showing the lovely golden honey that's ready to be taken by the beekeeper. So he's about to harvest that honey off. So usually when he's harvesting honey off, or he or she, they will put the frames into, so they'll have a super. So that's actually the honey super that I spoke about earlier. So they'll take that whole super off. They'll know that that's all ready to extract and to take the honey from. So they'll take that box of honey and they'll start to stack them on the back of their truck and then cover them down properly so that they're all safe and clean and it's all food safe. And then they'll truck them back to their extraction shed. So this is an extraction shed at Beekeeper Rodney's place. And you can see here, these are all the boxes that have been brought back. So beekeepers will do a special, it's a little bit hard to explain, but they do certain mechanisms to make sure that by the time they go back to get the boxes of honey that there's no bees left in there. So they actually use what you would call clearer boards, but it's kind of hard to explain. So I won't go too much into detail on that. But yes, as you can see here, so this is the honey extractor. So that right there is the uncapper, and this box here is all ready to get extracted. So what happens is the frame goes into the uncapper and it scrapes all of the beautiful white wax that we talked about that the bees cap all of the honey off with, it literally just scrapes the top of that off. And so then it goes through the conveyor and then it goes into this chamber. And what this chamber is going to do is it's going to then spin all of that honey out of those frames, and then it collects in the bottom and pumps up, and it pumps into a container. So this is the beautiful honey dripping off. So this is what happens is it spins it all out and it gets it all out of there. And that's the shot of all of the frames completely spun and empty of the honey. And then what the beekeeper does is he then takes those are stickies. That's what they call stickies. And he'll take those stickies, or she'll take those stickies, and they're ready to go back into the apiary for the bees to fill up again. So the beekeepers, when they're extracting the honey off, they also take sample jars of the honey. That's very important for our quality assurance processes and tracing back what honey came from where. And these are just I just wanted to share this photo with you because it's just so beautiful, the different colors of honey that you can get. And usually the darker the honey, the darker the flavor, and the lighter the honey, the lighter the flavor. It's really, really beautiful. So then once the beekeepers, so this is Beekeeper Rodney and Beekeeper Will. So Rodney is Will's dad. And a lot of our beekeepers are actually generational beekeepers. So some families have been sending us in honey for 3 to 4 generations now. So that's pretty cool. But these are the containers that they send them in to us. So these beekeepers are dropping it off to us, which they can do, or sometimes they'll send it on freight. But these are the food safe containers that they send it to us in, and they just keep the honey nice and clean and safe so that when it arrives here, then we can get ready to test it and to taste it. So that's the next important thing. We have a master honey taster here and blender. His name is Peter, and he's been working with us for over 40 years now. So his sole job is to taste and to grade and to price, and then also to blend the different beautiful Australian honeys that we get in. And you can see him here having a little bit of fun mixing up some of the honeys. As I sort of said before, the darker the honey, the darker the flavor, and the lighter the honey, the lighter the flavor. So we get lots of different flavors in. Some are very caramel, some are very butterscotch, some are quite candy tasting, some are quite deep and almost like a fruity sort of flavor. So there's lots of different flavors of honey. So in addition to honey production, our beekeepers also do a very important thing, and that is at certain times of the year, they will move their hives using their big trucks and their little, the little multi ones or the forklifts to move their hives to crop pollination. So this is just a little bit of a example of the types of crops that are either, 100% reliant, 90%, 70%. So you can see here, I don't know about you, but I love avocados, and avocados actually are 100% dependent on honeybees to pollinate them. So without the bees, we have a whole lot less avocados, and that'd be a really big shame because avocados are delicious. So just for an example, so you can see here, there's a beautiful avocado on toast. So this is all thanks to the bees. We can see the melon there, can see the milk. and obviously some honey, and the milk there, a bit of honey drizzled there, and some berries. So berries are very important to get bee pollination. And this is breakfast without the bees. So it looks pretty boring to me when you compare it. So there's a lot less avocado, which was an absolute tragedy. So bees also, when we look at the milk dropping down there, so bees actually pollinate lucerne crops as well, which lucerne is your hay that feeds cattle, which is very important in milk production. So it's quite amazing just how important honeybees are to food production. So I think it's 2/3 of everything we eat is thanks to honeybees. And this is just a little bit of an example of, so Beekeeper Rodney that I showed you before. So this is Beekeeper Rodney at some avocado orchards. So he is doing a bit of a check on his bees. So that's an avocado tree there. There's some more hives that are on the pallets. So this is one of his little bees pollinating the avocado flowers. So she's getting all the pollen all over her body, and then she's dusting it across to another flower. And in that process, what that means is the tree is actually able to reproduce and to create the fruit. And this is the result. So all of this process is super important in ensuring that we all have avocados and other important food crops that we eat every day. So that's just another important thing that some of our beekeepers do at certain times of the year. Another example is almonds. So beekeepers will take their bees to almonds, and I think there was this year over 250,000 hives went to almond pollination. So it's quite amazing just the role that the beautiful little honeybee plays in all of our lives by helping us with food, having food on our tables. So thanks, guys. That's it. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to hang back and talk to you about it. So thank you.
Fantastic, Jessica. Thank you. That was sensational. I learned so much then. There's so much to know about bees. They're pretty intelligent little organisms, aren't they? And
they're incredible.
They are, and they play so many important roles in agriculture and food production. It's an amazing story. So we'll just see if there's any questions. I probably have a couple of questions for you before we finish up. In terms of with the yes, Robin's got a question. Go for it, Robin.
It's actually Tyson would like to ask a question.
Okay.
This Tyson. Is our support class. So Tyson, come up here to the computer. Our speaker's not working on our board, so we need to go through the computer.
Oh, that's okay.
Oh, that's okay. So if
nice loud voice.
If you put up a flower in your hand, does the bee come if you're near a bee?
I think it depends. If the bee's really hungry and there's not a lot around in the environment, I'd say that they would definitely maybe try and have a go at that flower. But usually they've probably figured out where to go for their honey or their pollen. So what actually happens is the bees, when they actually find a honey flow, and I forgot to tell you about this, I'm so sorry, the bees actually go back to the hive and she does a little dance. So bees, that's the way bees communicate. They do like these little dances to each other, and they help each other navigate to, it's called a waggle dance. I don't know if you've heard of it, but they'll do a waggle dance, and then the bee will tell her sisters where to go to find nectar and pollen and water even. So yeah, so I don't know, maybe one day if it was not a lot in the environment, they might do, go to that flower and then do a waggle dance and say, hey, come look at this, I found a flower, a little boy with a flower.
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you, Tyson.
I've got a question for you, Jessica. Lots of vegetables and the like are grown in glass houses these days, like tomatoes and things like that.
Yeah.
So do they rely on bees or because bees don't really like being enclosed in glass houses and things like that.
No,
So,
no.
So what happens in glass houses? Are there bees or not?
I don't think so, because bees use polar rays to navigate, and glass houses, or even the tunnels that you see over the blueberries. So they're doing a bit of research at the moment to understand for example, the blueberries that that they have in, that they're farming, sometimes have the domes, like the tunnels over the top of them, and there are bees still pollinating the blueberries. It's not enclosed, but there can be a bit of disruption to the polar rays. So they're actually doing a bit of research to find out how they can still protect the crops without being detrimental to the bees and the pollination efforts of the bees. Yeah, I don't know about glass houses though.
Yes, very interesting. We've got another question.
Thank you. This is Alex. He'd like to ask a question.
Sure. Hi, Alex.
Hi.
Right up here.
I got a question. If bees' bodies will get long when they're getting older.
Sorry, it just cut out a little bit.
Alex's question was about the length of the bee. We saw how long the queen bee was, and he just wanted to know if all bees keep growing as they get older.
No, not really. No, the queen bee's the only one with the really long abdomen, because she's the only bee that lays eggs in the hive. So, well, that's not quite true. You can get workers that lay eggs, but anyway, they're not fertilized. So she's the only one that has the long body. Yeah.
That's only the queen. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Any other questions?
Alex.
I've got a question. I had some beautiful poppy flowers in my garden recently, and I noticed the bees just went nuts for them. It wasn't the normal collection of pollen and nectar. It was rubbing themselves all over it. And I was just wondering if the poppies had a special ingredient that they did like.
Don't know. Haven't heard that one.
Yes, I had the
Sounds like
same experience in my garden. The bees love my poppies as well. It's quite amazing.
Yeah. No, I haven't heard that. Most of my experience is with our beekeepers putting them on eucalypt trees. So I'm not as familiar with some of the other different flora, but that sounds interesting.
Indeed. Indeed. I think we've come to the end of the session today. Unless there are other questions from the class, so just so we know, where's our class today coming from?
We're from Dungog in New South Wales. So at the bottom of the Barrington Tops.
I know it well. Yes, yeah. I was just up in your part of the world last week. So
and we've got lots of beekeepers around that area too.
Yes, we do.
Indeed. Wonderful part of the world.
Yeah.
All good. Well,
thank you very much. We've really enjoyed this.
That's wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. That's sensational. And thanks to all of you for listening intently today, guys. I hope you learnt heaps about honeybees, and thank Jessica for a great presentation today. That was sensational. I think we all learned a whole heap of things about honeybees. That's it.
Oh,
excellent.
Thanks, guys.
All good. Thanks so much for your presentation today, Jessica.
No problem. My pleasure.
And we'll this session here will be recorded, and we'll share it with teachers and schools across Australia. No doubt.
Hopefully it was okay.
It was sensational. No, I really do appreciate your time today. And thanks to everyone for joining us today on National Ag Week, as we're calling it, and lots of other sessions this week. So please join in and enjoy all the wonderful things about agriculture in Australia. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.